Thanks everyone for joining our session today. Really excited to have William share his story about how he helped break down data silos. If you haven't already, make sure to join tools-Hightouch in dbt Slack, where you can ask questions and intro yourselves. We'll start with some quick intros. My name is Pedram Navid, Head of Data here at Hightouch. We have Amy Chen, Senior Partner Engineer at dbt, and William Su, Customer Success Ops at Blend. Next, I'll let Amy give a quick intro to dbt.
Yeah, so before we get started, I just want to make sure we have room for folks who might be new to dbt and Hightouch, so we can just quickly have a overview about why you should actually care about this webinar or care about our tools in general. What dbt is it's essentially a tool that was designed for collaboration. We created a single place for folks that can join in across data teams, organizations to meet and collaborate. We chose SQL as our chosen language because it's an accessible language that most folks are already skilled in. And we incorporated software engineering best practices to create a tool that is easy to interact with, provide version control, automate testing, and all things that are generally not typical to an analyst's workflow. How dbt works is by parsing and compiling code for your data pipeline and making the data warehouse execute. We don't move data around, and we use the warehouse's compute capabilities. Now that I've made my marketing team happy, I'm gonna turn it over to Pedram to talk about Hightouch values.
Awesome. That's my turn to make my marketing team happy. Hightouch, we're also very bullish on this data warehouse, and what we do is we help data people unlock the power of their warehouse in all their downstream business tools. Once you've gone and set up dbt and you've done all the hard work of putting models in place, the next thing that inevitably happens is everybody from sales and marketing is going to want access to that data in all their downstream tools. And Hightouch really just makes that really easy to do, helping you power some of your workflows. I'll do a quick live demo here. Everything's going to go just fine, I'm sure. And we'll show you sort of what that looks like in a few seconds. So this is your Hightouch workspace. We've got a Jaffle Shop workspace going here. I set up a Jaffle database, but here you could imagine your warehouse or anything else connected as a source. The next thing you do is create a model. A model is really like a one-to-one representation for a dbt model. It's a way of describing your data. You could do raw SQL if you wish. In our case, I set up dbt connection within Hightouch. So once you click here, it connects to your dbt repo, and then you have access to all the dbt models. So for example, we click on customers here, we can see it's reading from dbt. It's got the description pulled in from your dbt schema. Click preview, and you'll see it's a pretty standard Jaffle Shop table here with your orders and your lifetime value. We'll give it a cool name, and we'll pick our primary key, and we'll add a sink. And a sink is really just a way to connect that data that you have to any destination. Here we'll pick Slack, but you could imagine Salesforce, your CRMs, your marketing applications, Asana, which I'm sure William will get into. And then you can decide, what kind of message you want to send, what channel to send it into, and whether you want to use plain text or block it. I am going to save us some time by not editing this all manually. We'll use this edit as JSON feature to copy paste some code I hope still works. As you can see, it's filled in all this information using Slack Block Kit. And we'll hit continue. We'll pick manual here, but you could also use dbt Cloud so that once your dbt Cloud job finishes running, your Hightouch sync will start, or pick your own interval as well. We'll hit finish, we'll hit run. And on the first run, it's just going to hit our database, pull all that data in. You can see there's 398 rows. And we'll pull up Slack in one of my many windows right here. And we'll pull this up. This is a feat of 3 windows. What we'll do is run a Python script I wrote to just create some orders and then run it again, mimicking what would happen in real life. And then you can see it read those rows, and we see we have some new customers and some new orders. And in a nutshell, that's really all there is to it. The next step, I think I will turn it over to William Stop sharing my screen. And he can talk to us about how Blend uses dbt and Hightouch.
For sure. Thank you, Jerome. Nice to meet you all, everyone. I'm William. I work at Blend. For those who don't know, Blend is a financial technology company. We produce software for financial institutions. The software is dedicated towards really making the consumer's ability to apply for loans easier, simpler, more secure, and faster. With that said, I'll go and share my screen. Let me share. Oops, not the right share button, the present button. All right, can you all see my screen nice and clean? All right, awesome. So I am going to talk about Blend's own personal execution of dbt and Hightouch. In particular, how we're using that to break down the data silos here at Blend. So before going to our actual implementation, I'm going to talk a little bit about the problems we are specifically facing at Blend. So when I think about the problems we had, there are really two situations. The first one I'm going to talk about is data silos. And what I mean by that is at Blend, there are a bunch of various software as a service platforms we're using. You have, of course, your Asanas, your Salesforce, your Marketos, your NetSuites. Individually, each of those platforms are really rich sets of data. But some of the most interesting analysis really resides at the intersection between those various data sets. Prior to dbt and Hightouch, there wasn't really a good way for us to do that intersection analysis. If we need to do it, oftentimes or not, we are literally talking about someone going to Salesforce, copying, pasting a value, going to Asana, copying and pasting the value into Asana, and you can imagine a back and forth cycle as data within one platform updates and the data doesn't update elsewhere. You can imagine there's a lot of context switching there. It's not very efficient and just prone to a lot of manual errors. Now, we did recognize this issue of data silos very early on. So we did try to create our own in-house automated solutions. And that actually goes to the second problem we were facing, which is when we did create our own in-house tools, and I'm referring to things like Airflow operators with Airflow DAGs and Zapier to set up flows. In the beginning, this was a good way to bring data from one ecosystem to another. However, what we found was as we onboarded more and more platforms, this just became something that was costing a lot of time and money for our team. There was a lot of additional development effort that would need to be put in place to do something just very simple, like maybe even just adding a Salesforce field into our warehouse and then pushing that into Asana. Something that you would think should just take maybe a few minutes at most could sometimes extend out to a few weeks. So what was our solution? This is where we come in and we adopt dbt, Cloud, and Hightouch. Now for that, I'm going to go through this chart. I'm sure it's very familiar with all of y'all. It's your quintessential modern data tech stack kind of diagram. What we have on the far left are various platforms, your Salesforce, your Asanas, your NetSuite, your Marketos. We then use an ELT tool to load it into Amazon Redshift. Here at Blend, that's a mix between in-house tooling and Fivetran. Once the data is within Amazon Redshift, what that means is you now have a bunch of data from Salesforce, Asana, Marketo, all into one place. We use dbt to transform and blend those data sets together. Then what we want to do is derive actions from those data sets. How we do that is we use a reverse ETL tool, Hightouch, in order to push it to where individuals are residing in, such as Salesforce, Slack, and Asana. So I'm going to go into a little bit more about why exactly we chose to use dbt for a transformation layer. So for context, prior to dbt, we were using in-house tooling. And what I meant by that were things like Airflow and SQL transformation operators within Airflow. The reason why we went to use dbt was first and foremost, dbt promotes good software engineering practices, in particular version control. And I can't tell you how many times a solid version control system has saved my own personal analysis. The second part is dbt on top of our warehouse allows us to very easily blend the data sets from different sources, from Asana, from NetSuite, from Marketo, via a language that we're all familiar with, SQL. And then finally, probably the biggest thing was dbt was just easier and more feature-rich than our former in-house tooling. dbt Cloud, in particular, it's GUI, and its ability to set schedules, set alerts, the ability to view DAGs very easily, the ability to set up tests. These were all quality of life enhancements that just was not being built out in our own in-house tooling that dbt natively supported. With that, when we implement dbt and Hightouch, what exactly occurs? Well, first off, on a very pragmatic level, we were able to set up flows that were able to reduce our financial team's reporting in half. In particular, the context there is we have a professional services team within Blend. We bill our customers based off how many hours are spent every month. As a result, our financial team needs to, create those financial reports every single month. We're able to reduce the creation of those financial reports by around 4 days, which you can imagine on a monthly timescale is pretty significant. The second big thing is just really data blending. Without dbt and Hightouch, I generally don't think we would have as elegant of a data blending solution. And then finally, by centralizing on the warehouse, we are able to use the warehouse as that source of truth. And that makes sure that there's alignment across metrics, across ideas in our various software as a service platforms. And with that, I'll pass it back on to Pedram.
Okay, thank you so much. Next up, it's really just a fireside chat for the three of us. But again, feel free to add questions into the chat or into the Tools Hightouch channel, and we'll get to those as well. Our first question here is for William. One thing we've been thinking about is measuring success for your team after you've implemented Hightouch and dbt. How do you know that you've done a good job? Were there any measures that you've done to look at the before and after of success of your team?
Yeah, so first and foremost is the results that we're delivering. So things like that story from a finance team, how we're able to cut down their monthly reporting by 4 days. To us, that's telling me, especially as an operations guy, that, hey, we're doing our job well. We are generally impacting operations. The second thing for me, though, that I think is really important, especially with tools like Hightouch, is cross-collaboration. Making sure that the tool is not just siloed to, me as an operations person, but that other teams can also be using it. Especially since, dbt is all about Git and version control collaboration. Hightouch is all about that friendly GUI, making sure that other people outside of my own team are using the tool. So those are really my two success metrics when it comes to the implementation of dbt and Hightouch. One, how fast and how much is it actually impacting our operational flows? And two, how well are we proliferating across the org, across other teams than just myself?
That's great to hear. So what I'm hearing is you're not trying to lock down access to all these tools to only the data team who knows best, but you actually want to open it up to people in marketing and sales and finance and all that to help them enable themselves to get the answers they need in the tools they need.
Especially when it comes to understanding what we're doing. And that's actually probably two of the things I love about dbt. dbt Docs has been amazing. It's really helped to unveil some of the black box that we've been doing to other people. With the data cataloging and actually seeing the SQL transformations you're doing in a very pretty GUI. And then Hightouch allowing people, once we set up those dbt models, it's really just a few clicks for them to set up these flows.
So
That's
you
awesome.
mentioned, sorry.
Go ahead.
So you mentioned the improvement in cross collaboration and especially with implementing this new stack. So I'm really curious about what the migration to the stack looked like. Did you meet any resistance for these teams to adopt this very different tooling?
I think for our company, there actually wasn't a lot of resistance on a theoretical level. Like when we saw Hightouch, Fivetran, dbt, we were like, wow, these tools are already doing everything we're doing exactly the same, but in a much more scalable and efficient manner. Most of the resistance only came in the rollout, meaning, we're handling our old tooling. As you're onboarding a new tooling, you need to maintain the old tooling so things don't shut off immediately. But, there wasn't really any theoretical backlash against it. I think everyone was aligned like, yeah, these tools are doing exactly what we're doing, but just better.
I hope you don't mind me asking a follow-up question, but I'm curious to ask you what are really helpful ways that you utilize to get ramped up on dbt and Hightouch. Like, is there something you would highly recommend that folks definitely do in order to be successful in the migration?
For sure. So the Hightouch end, I will have to say kudos to the Hightouch team. The GUI is so simple that honestly, I feel if you just drop a person into Hightouch, they'll be able to get onboarded by themselves very quickly. On the dbt end, there's a bit more technical expertise that you need to understand there. But the great thing about that is you have an online course called dbt Learn, which is incredibly helpful, very thorough. The only thing that I would definitely recommend in addition to dbt Learn is to see if you can get yourself a one-on-one mentor to sort of just work with you and guide through you as you're doing those dbt migrations. So that can either be, maybe there's someone at your company who already knows dbt, or if dbt is completely new to your company, you have a wonderful community, the dbt Slack community, which is definitely a wonderful resource to leverage.
Awesome. I had a question actually too. It's more around best practices, maybe around the reverse ETL pipeline, because that's, I think, a lot newer for everybody, including ourselves. We get asked this question a lot. It's like, what are the best practices for using Hightouch with dbt? Are there any best practices you kind of want to share around how to set that up? Should people be writing custom SQL? Should they always connect to a dbt model? What do you think?
For sure. And this was something that we were sort of learning as we're building out our own Hightouch flows. We were sort of bouncing between, all right, should we just do a select star from a dbt model? Should we be writing custom transformation within Hightouch? My personal recommendation would be for your core data sets that are very important, definitely do a select star from a dbt model, because that way you can really leverage the version controlling that really dbt excels at. But there's a lot of operational flows that are just like, send a Slack ping when some data quality thing looks a little wonky. That isn't super necessarily a core data set, but can have big quality of life improvements across the org. In those kind of situations, I sort of view it like kind of a better version of Zapier, where you don't necessarily need to have it like locked down and version controlled. So I would say it depends on the context. If it's a core data set that is high priority, definitely get it version controlled. If it's a quality of life kind of thing, which, honestly, if someone turned it off one day, it would suck, but it wouldn't crush your business. That's fine to keep within Hightouch.
Awesome. And are there any future directions you want to explore with this dbt Hightouch integration? Any other workflows you have planned coming up?
I think for Blend right now, the big thing is on more, using Hightouch and dbt more, breaking even more of these data silos down. Do what we've done for the GTM side, the go-to-market side of our house, or for the product side. More and more breaking of data silos, I think, is the theme of the game.
That makes me want to ask you, like, is there anything on your wish list for dbt or Hightouch that would help you get to that more?
Not really on dbt and Hightouch, to be honest. There are other things in the modern data tech stack that I would have sort of wish lists on, especially when we go towards a more the ELT route. But given that our ELT provider is not on this call, no point in me bringing them up right here.
We can pass it on to them if you like later.
I assume they're in the dbt Slack community, so there's ears everywhere.
I would say the only thing actually that definitely has been on my mind that is correlated with dbt and Hightouch is just real-time alerting. So instantaneous pinging. So I'm not talking about like, oh, 5 minutes. 5 minutes is great, but there are like certain use cases where it's like 1 minute, like instantaneous pings. And that is something that I think we're definitely exploring into sort of as a separate path here at Blend.
That makes a lot of sense. I feel like right now streaming data warehouses, everything real time is like having a true moment in our ecosystem, and that it'll be interesting to see if it's a trend or not. I'm curious if there's anything that you think might be a trend or whatever is exciting inside of the data world that you're also excited about.
Oh, I'll say actually, now that you bring it up, one thing that I am very excited about is the idea of a metric store, in particular documentation around metrics. I think dbt has been great at the documentation of those data sets. The next thing is, all right, well, how do you document the roll-ups of those into scalable metrics that are consistent across the world? And I think there's a lot of different ways to execute that. There's some people talking about, let's put in the BI layer. There is dbt with entire dbt metric documentation. And I'm very interested to see where that leads to, where we sort of land onto in the data world there.
After this call, I will definitely send over the very exciting issue that we opened up on the dbt core repository, which is getting a lot of attention. I think it'd be an interesting read for you.
For sure, would love it.
Speaking about documentation, do you have similar concerns with documenting the reverse ETL pipeline, or is that part pretty straightforward for you and your team?
You know, for us, we very much love documenting as close to, well, I guess a better way to rephrase it is, if you can name your things in a way where you don't need to add descriptive documentation, that's the ideal path for us. And I think we've had a lot of success on the reverse high touch part of that. Like, if you just have a good naming convention, I feel like because of how simple it is to write a name of a high touch model, that a lot of times that is sufficient for a lot of the documentation of these streams. Supplement that with dbt documentation, and I personally feel like that's a robust solution right there.
That makes a lot of sense. And one piece that we've been thinking about a lot is, how do we connect that dbt model with the high touch model in a more explicit way? Because right now you're doing it, for example, in the UI. One thing we've been thinking about is maybe using exposures to sort of connect that final line between the dbt output and, the dbt output and the high touch input. Curious to think if that's something you would find useful.
You know, to be fully honest, dbt exposures, although is a feature that we would love to be using in Blend, isn't one that I have at the moment. That said, greater partnership between dbt and high touch is definitely a plus. One of the things that has really helped us out is the direct ability to run high touch models right after a dbt run. Like, that native integration by tapping into the dbt API has actually been really impactful, especially as we're trying to tackle that problem, like real-time alerting. How close can we get to real time? Those kind of integrations are absolutely very helpful.
Looks like we have some questions from the audience. So let me grab one, which is there a explicit goal of this? Is it a explicit goal of this setup with dbt and high touch to get folks out of using dashboards? Where do dashboards live in this world? Who is using them?
For sure. It is definitely not the case to get people out of dashboards. In my particular example, it's more about getting people into the CRM that they're most comfortable with. So for example, our sales team, they live and breathe Salesforce. Everything is within Salesforce. They want to be looking at reports within Salesforce. And in fact, there are dashboards within Salesforce. However, unless you have that data within Salesforce, you can't really create those dashboards. So our goal isn't to get rid of dashboards per se, but rather move dashboards to where people are actually operating in. So rather than have a Salesforce and a Tableau dashboard, have a Tableau dashboard directly within Salesforce, which is great because Salesforce now owns Tableau.
That is true. Yeah, I definitely validate this idea that we want to meet the users where they are and not try to get them into another tool, having to learn about that.
And ideally have the same numbers everywhere too, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
One source of
so like
truth.
if someone is seeing something in Salesforce, the great thing is that metric in Salesforce is centralized in the warehouse. It's the exact same metric that we're pushing to you as an Asana task. You can feel comfortable that you're not looking at the wrong info. It's the same info that everyone else is seeing.
Make debugging so much easier and changing things a lot easier as well.
Exactly. Less context switching.
We do have another question, William. Is that huge mug filled with coffee or water?
It is a huge mug filled with coffee. I will admit, I drink way more coffee than I should, especially since the COVID pandemic started.
People bake bread, you just started drinking coffee.
Absolutely. Things, it's not even good coffee. Like, this is just drip brew coffee. I'm not doing any pour overs or what is it? Cold brews. It's just good old drip.
Oh, yeah.
Cold brew is the easiest approach to coffee as a non-coffee drinker. Oh yeah, at least it's not instant coffee. The standards varied.
That is a good point. It is not instant
Yeah.
coffee.
I know a few people at Hightouch who do the instant coffee, so you set the bar at least a little bit higher than them.
William, I'm really interested in asking a little bit more about yourself. Like, how did you get to your current role, and like, what did that journey look like?
Yeah, for sure. So I graduated from UCSD with a degree in management science. Other schools might call that industrial engineering or operations research, which makes a lot of sense to why I'm in an operations role today. Sort of my journey towards where I'm at started off with first your traditional data analyst route, like building out Tableau dashboards. When I moved to Blend, that's when I began to pick up a lot of more software engineering skills, working within Git, building out those SQL models within Airflow. And then from there, natural transition to our current, where I'm at right now. These, those in-house Git things I were talking about, they were basically us doing self-independent discovery of these kind of things.
That makes sense. Well, I'm glad your journey is more technical than your coffee making skills.
We'll find that one next. We have another question here from Joshua, wanting to clarify whether you're using Hightouch for reverse ETL, but also self-serving analytics.
I would say that Hightouch as reverse ETL is sort of those progenitors towards self-serving analytics. Meaning if someone wants to look into we want people to be looking to Salesforce and being able to get analytics within Salesforce, but we can't do that unless we have a reverse ETL tool that can spit data from our warehouse to Salesforce itself. So I wouldn't say that Hightouch as reverse ETL is replacing self-serving analytics. Rather, it is a tool for us to get to that end state.
And your view of self-serving analytics is just, again, meeting people where they are, right?
Yep.
Instead of giving them one tool.
Yep. I mean, to add to that, if they're able to find the answer without pinging a data analyst, to me, that is the Turing test for self-serving analytics. Can you get the results you need to find accurately without needing to add in a human being into that mix?
Great, thank you. All right. Oh, we got one more here. You want to talk about your cloud warehouse journey as well?
I would say here at Blend, we've really just been on one reporting warehouse, which is Redshift. So there hasn't really been a journey there. We've lived and died by Redshift for the good and the bad. I know personally throughout my just own career, I've seen us going from CSVs being loaded into like emails and things like that, to putting things into relational databases, to dashboards being built off those and things of that sort. But really, I mean, just going back to it, I'd say for me, there hasn't really been a cloud warehouse journey. It's been Redshift, all Redshift.
Oh, here's a good one. We know you're using Hightouch with the CRM, but what about sending data to Google Sheets? And how do you manage a balance between Google Sheets and actual CRMs?
That is a great question and very serendipitous, because I actually was just talking with a colleague about this just early this morning about using Hightouch to send data to a Google Sheet. We haven't really explored the Hightouch to Google Sheet route yet, but we have explored the Google Sheet to CRM route via Hightouch. The way I sort of view it is if it's like an ad hoc one-time kind of thing, that's where a Google Sheet excels at. But if we're talking about something more systematic, you want to get people out of the Google Sheet and into the CRM directly. So to put practice to word, one of the things where we're really using the Google Sheet and Hightouch Sync for is things like a one-time uploads into Asana, one-time uploads into Zendesk. Things especially where there is a native CSV upload feature that these companies provide. So like Salesforce, great, they have a CSV upload tool. That's not always going to be the case for some of these other platforms that we're using. And that's where Hightouch really helps out.
In our experience internally as well, we do the exact same thing. we'll have these uploads of lists into our CRMs. The nice thing is you can write SQL against them and preview them before uploading them. You can test one row at a time, which is nice. The only time we've used Google Sheets as a destination has really been a Band-Aid. Before maybe our CRM was ready, we would have a Google Sheet of, hey, here's all our customers or here's our partners. You can take a look at that. But the more we can get it out of Sheets into their actual tool they like to use, the better.
Exactly. Although in fairness, I will point out there are quite a few CRMs that basically just look like glorified Google Sheets if you really think about it.
Everything is a Google Sheet in the end.
Well, everything is Excel at the end.
That's true.
Everything is a table. Don't tell that to
Yeah.
people who like MongoDB.
My concern is we start going down the line of dbt needs to support Microsoft Access, and I really don't want us to go in that direction.
It's gonna happen, maybe.
It's not. I don't want it. It looks like we got an anonymous attendee question, which is, I didn't realize you could do that. Has there been a challenge making your team actually use the data that they get in their tools? How do you encourage them to do that?
You know, Hightouch is really good at doing this. What I found is that users will use the data if you just give it to them. They don't really question where the data is coming from. So like if we send a Slack ping saying, hey, something is off with your data, they'll respond to that. They don't really question back and say, oh, where is this data coming from? They'll say like, oh, okay, what is this ping about? We'll go investigate and play around with that data. So as long as you're sure that the data you're sending out is accurate, direct Slack pings, notifications in Salesforce, when something pops up, people will respond and react to it.
Do you think this is partly because of like having more documentation? We now have version control and like testing. So they're like, okay, you've already thought about the hard part. So like, I should just go with the flow and trust it.
Absolutely, yeah. You really need to make sure there is a sense of data quality. Meaning if you're sending a bunch of false positives, people will start ignoring it. But as long as what you're sending is accurate and like they build out the trust, like, oh, they only send this stuff if it actually is something I need to care about, they'll respond to it. And one of the great things about dbt and Hightouch is if you accidentally send a wrong mistake, because they're so easy to use, there's a very high turnaround time to fix that mistake so you don't break that trust down. So like a great example of that is we have a QC right now that's set up that will send out our ICs like, oh, you didn't log 40 hours per week. That is a really important QC because like we need to make sure you're logging all your hours or else we can't build them. The thing is, if you send it out as a false positive, meaning, oh, you did log 40 hours, but you get a Slack ping either way, people will start ignoring it. It's really important that when that happens, we have the ability to fix it. And that would not be possible to do quickly without a dbt and Hightouch flow.
Now I have a potentially stupid question to ask you. What does contribution to your dbt project look like? Do you have like non-technical people who are like going to the docs, like actually like using all of it, or are they just living in their own interface and then pinging whoever owns that object?
So I would say the first place that people go to is the docs. If they can't answer it within the docs, that's where they'll go to. When they're not able to answer it within the docs, that's when they ping to the individuals. One of the cool things about the dbt docs is like, you can put a tag and say, this is the person or team that owns this. So when they see a model and it's like, oh, there's all this great documentation, but I still don't fully understand what's going on. They know who to reach out to rather than this sort of hen and peck game of where they need to go and ask everyone at our company, like, who's creating this model? Like, oh, it's owned by marketing. Go talk with marketing. They'll be able to point you to the right person if you need that individual hands-on care.
That is such a great use.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Ooh, I didn't mean to lower my hand.
Oh, I thought that was a high five. It's going to high five
Oh.
you actually.
Yes, let's use the race. Sorry, I meant to click into Zoom. So my question might going back a little bit more in terms of migration, mostly because I think that's when I joined the Blend account. So I'm kind of curious, like, are there any specific things that you might have you want to explicitly warn people to avoid doing, and just to save them from your own pain points?
Yeah, I would say the big thing is if you can do, so at Blend, because we're a fintech company, at first we did a off-premise version of dbt Cloud, where like dbt and all the stuff is stored within our own premises. I would recommend that if possible, try to avoid that route, just because it's a bit more difficult to, troubleshoot, upgrade, really
Luckily, we
leverage
don't
the
offer.
newest features.
Luckily, we don't offer that anymore, specifically because we've learned how painful it is for our users.
Yeah, and the great thing is, like,
Good.
InfoSec eventually did say, like, it's good to migrate to the other path here with dbt. So that's confidence that dbt has some good security going on.
Our security team will definitely be happy to hear that.
One question we had is, how does your team work with the central data team? Do you have a central data team? How does that structure kind of look like?
For
And
sure.
where are the decisions made?
For sure. We don't really have like a central data team. We do have a data engineering team, and their mandate is really just to make sure that our tooling is up to working. So the way it sort of goes is we'll go talk with data engineering. They'll set up, whether that's specific vendors like Fivetran or dbt or Hightouch. Once they've done their blessing and done all the configuration, gone through the InfoSec, that's when they pass them off to us, and that's when we start using them. So it's really the way we work with data engineering is they enable us to do the work that we're doing right now.
And when you say us, is that specifically your team, or are there analysts embedded within different parts of
I
that?
would say it is my team, product analytics, marketing, any team that's relying on data. Data engineering plays a vital role in enabling them to do that. But once it gets into the hands of the functions, it's up to the individual functions on how they use the data. And that's actually where dbt comes in, because when you have data within individual functions, dbt sort of acts as that forcing function to get everyone to collaborate with each other, be saying, hey, we're going to be doing this PR, can you review this? Things like that.
So you have one central repo for all the functional teams? Awesome.
Yep, exactly.
And that way you can share knowledge and also review.
Exactly.
That's a good way of actually keeping people still connected, because I find data analysis is one of those very lonely jobs a lot of the time. And so being able to connect with other teams is great.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I might not be working directly with the marketing team, but by virtue of code review, I always have my eye on what the marketing team is doing with their models, or what the product analytics teams are doing in their models.
So in terms of like technical actual application, who reviews does everyone review their PRs? Like, how do you decide who's the correct reviewer of your PR and what team?
For sure. If it is within a team, if you have another analytical engineer on your team who can review it, go ahead and ask them. Other teams might have only one analytical engineer or someone who's serving that role. In that case, that's when they point out and we'll reach out to another team for a review there. Another thing is, if you're touching another team's model, one of the things we want to make sure is that, all right, although maybe you have another analytical engineer on your team who could review it, make sure to reach out that model's owner and make sure that you get their analytical engineer's approval and rubber stamp.
So every model has an owner then specified, and that's through the docs, or?
Not every model, unfortunately, but ideally, yes.
Right. In a perfect world.
Yeah, in a perfect world, you would have every model in our mart. We have in the tags, it's marketing, CS ops, sales ops, ... Our most important models to have that tag. I'll say some of our staging models, intermediate models, things of that sort. you can imagine where the documentation might not be as perfect there.
You happen to use the code owners approach in Git, where you essentially have like a file that declares code owners as well?
Yes. But I will admit our code owners is very simple. Just here's two groups, the operations teams, the product analytics teams, and those are the two code owners. And actually, I think you also have a third one, which is like the data code owners, the data engineers, if you need to do any of the backend stuff on dbt, like installing a package or something like that.
Oh,
Do you have
that's
anything like a,
interesting. Sorry, go.
do you have anything like a style guide or even tests that you perform on the code people are committing to the repo?
Style guide, we definitely recommend just leveraging, the style guides that already exist online. I'm a huge fan of the GitLab style guide, to be honest. Regarding testing, it's a huge plus, especially recently, if you can apply some of the dbt tests as you're developing the PR. Like I know personally on my hand, whenever I develop a PR, I try to make sure there's at least one test to make sure that I am not doing something wrong. Like if I know off the bat that this model is going to fail if I don't have a one-to-one relationship, I sure will make sure that I have a unit test that will test for that one-to-one relationship.
Oh, that is such a good question. What is your modeling methodology? Are you using Kimmel modeling, Data Vault? Dimensional light is what we call ours.
I think I use what you would call Kimball Light, where you divide the tables up into fact and dim tables. And those are how we sort of, divvy it up between the kind of tables that we send out. I don't think that's like actually like purely Kimball, where you have like the entire star schema kind of thing, but I would say Kimball Light.
I assume it's very similar to the our discourse post about how to structure our project.
Exactly. Yep, you got it.
So I think we might be coming up on time, if I'm not wrong.
You're right.
So I'm curious to ask if there's one last question, or we could just run away.
I have one last question. Commas before or after? Do you have an opinion, William?
I am definitely not a fan of leading commas. I understand the use cases where it is nice, but I definitely prefer commas after. That is one of my
Sure,
pet peeves, to be honest.
Oh, we have a real question, actually, just before we wrap it up. Real time or once a day refresh? If it is real time, how are you making sure you're susceptible to source change?
That is a good question. When we're talking about real time, within the sort of Fivetran, dbt, Redshift, that kind of flow, the closest we found to be able to get to real time is like 30-minute updates. In that case, if you're trying to do that, it's really important that one, you have Fivetran synced up to be doing as fast as possible. Ideally, you have that Fivetran to dbt integration set up where like Fivetran finishes running, dbt is going to do transformation. Then you have the dbt to Hightouch sync up. So when dbt runs, you then have Hightouch going on. If you want to get to real time using the modern data tech stack, it's really important to have all these various parts like working in alignment with each other. That said, to the best of our abilities, we've only really been able to hit like, that 30-minute mark. If we really need real time, which is like, oh, you like press something in Salesforce, 1 second later, you need a Slack button send out. That's when we either hopefully can leverage like a native Salesforce integration, or if we really need to, that's when we start needing to work in like Zapier and other iPaaS kind of things. Honestly, it's a pain to go down that other route, but sometimes you have to go down and use them.
Great. One thing I've also seen is people connecting directly to a Postgres database, preferably a replica, not prod, from Hightouch. And then that way they get pretty close to near time for their destinations. But that doesn't solve the reverse back into your warehouse problem. Yeah, I want to thank you, William, Amy, everyone else for joining. It's been great.